All right. Okay, great. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you everyone that's here online. My name is Pedro Torres. I'm the Tribal Liaison for Natural Resources, not National Resources. Planning process, and a little more in specific on some changes that have been made to the conservation planning process and our programs to assist with tribal traditional practices and food sovereignty. And so I'm going to pass it on over to Cody to get started. Oh, where do I have to point this thing for it to work? You?
Just go ahead and roll it. Yeah, just go ahead and roll it.
Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. Wanahu to all my Paiute friends up in here from Bishop. If anyone's in here, my name's Cody Leslie. As Pedro said, I'm a tribal conservation planner out of the Redlands office. It's just there's the closest office to here is up in Escondido, but I service all of Southern California. So anything from Bishop all the way down this way. So just give us a little background about our agency. Well. So I'm not going to tell the joke because I ain't going to tell it right. So on April 27, 1935, Congress passed a law. You can kind of see here, we had what was going on. You guys know what was kind of going on at that time in the 30s, right? We had the Dust Bowl going on. Depression was happening. So we're losing a lot of soil on our agriculture lands. This became a national problem. And so we were born on April 27th, 1935. In 1994, we changed over from the Soil Conservation Service to the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Does anybody know what other great event happened on April 27th? Anybody? It's this man's birthday.
It's my birthday. So, he did tell us. I'm proud of you, Cody.
So he was born to be an NRCSer. So yeah, go ahead. Next slide, please. So anybody here, like, are you guys, anyone familiar with NRCS programs at all? Has anyone ever worked with this? All right. So just to kind of take a step back also, I always tell everyone we're a secret government agency, right? We don't own no land and we don't make rules. We have rules within our programs, but we're not like the Forest Service. And although we are a Department of Agriculture, we kind of stay in our own little lane. We get money through the Farm Bill to implement our programs. So to kind of keep going, we have two, these are our two major programs we do, right? So we do technical assistance and financial assistance. So we have a diverse set of employees, from engineers, agronomists, rangeland management specialists, foresters. So we have those specialists that can also do technical assistance without financial assistance. With that being said, though, these are our two main programs: the EQIP program, Environmental Quality Incentives program. That's where we address specific resource concerns with specific practices. Those practices come with a standard payment rate, a national payment rate based on it. The rate will change based on what you're actually doing out there. EQIPs are a pretty solid program. I think we kind of I try to keep my EQIP contracts at about 3 years. So just you guys can get in, get your stuff done, and complete your project. Our other program, which is a little bit more in depth, is our CSP program. That's Conservation Stewardship Program. That's kind of for producers that after we've worked with you through EQIP. So for instance, some of our tribal lands around here, we have a lot of forest lands, right? So we would come through with EQIP initially to maybe do a fuels reduction, or whether you're we address resource concerns, right? So I don't want to get too in depth in that, but that's how we work, right? We just don't show up and pull practices out of nowhere. We have to address our practices to address a resource concern. So for instance, just so I don't stay too long here, but through EQIP, we would come out, let's say you guys had, we want to do some forest thinning, some fuels reduction. We would come out, we would pay you for specific practices through EQIP to get you up to the level of your threshold of where you need to meet and meet that objective. Later, CSP is like long-term program where you've already been in EQIP, you've already addressed your resource concerns. They're 5-year contracts, right? And it's a 5-year annual payment. So CSP is a little different. It is a 5-year payment. You have to already be meeting 2 resource concerns, and then you get a payment rate based on your acreage, and then you get an enhancement. So a lot of the CSP contracts we've done, we do what's considered called a cultural planting. So if you have some traditional plants or some basket weaving, anything that's used traditionally or culturally, that's one of our things we kind of throw in our CSP program there. So EQIP is usually where everybody starts. CSP is a little more challenging, but EQIP is a really good program, and it does provide some good financial assistance for folks. Go ahead, please. Sorry, I sound so rude.
Nick.
Right. So just to go back to our resource concerns, right? This is kind of how we work. I've talked to some folks today. We got this dumb term called SWAPA-E now, right? So soil, water, animals, plants, air. We now have humans and energy that's how we work, right? So those are within each one of those components, we have a list of resource concerns that we address through our practices. Some soil ones, erosion, sheet rill erosion, gully erosion, soil health, our plants. A common one is plant health and productivity, plant composition and structure. So every time we do a practice, it's to meet one of those objectives in that set of factors there. Go ahead, Evan. So before I switch over to this here, kind of the way we work is you have to have eligible land for NRCS, right? So we work in forest land, we work in cropland, we work in rangeland, and then any traditional land uses, tribal traditional land uses, we now consider, if you're growing like native plants or any type of traditional plant, that's considered cropland now. So it does become eligible for our programs. You have to have control of your land, right? So we work on trust land, fee land, allotments. So for instance, we do work with tribes as a whole, and then we have the ability to work with individual tribal members as well. The allotments, just to speak on it, allotments get a little tough. So if you are an allottee looking to work with NRCS, you really have to make sure you have control of that land, because that where it gets hard, right? So if you're on an assignment per se, we know you don't have a deed for that land, right? So you would basically need to go to tribal council, just get a letter of them approving you with your assignment number, showing your land, showing your assignment. That would give us that would account for us as land control. I like to bring it up because it's a big thing we run into sometimes. I'm working on some allotments right now, and it's little tricky. So yeah, having land control, and then just knowing when we come out, and I just like to bring it up too, right? When we come out, we're there to meet your objective, right? It's never NRCS's job to tell you what you're doing, what to do with your land, right? When we show up, we may point things out that we see that maybe you don't see, but for us, it's coming out, spending the time with you, going and seeing what you're doing, right? What your goals are, and seeing any problems that you've already identified. Then that's how we kind of start building it, right? So, I mean, that's why I said earlier, we have the ability to just do technical assistance, not just financial assistance, because sometimes that's huge, right? Like maybe you just want a forest management plan, or you just want an engineer to come out and give you some advice that you're not ready to enter into an agreement contract. So that's a huge part of what we do, is that technical assistance. That's what we actually started out as, was a technical assistance agency. So with no further ado, we do have some new practices. This one's a big one here. And with no further ado, I'm going to pass this on to Miss Erin so she can explain ISM SEMA. So take it away.
Thank you, Cody. So NRCS offers a wide variety of what we call conservation practices, and we also have enhancement activities. And so we will provide you with a long list of different conservation practices that could be as far as cover crop. If you have a community garden, there's something like a high tunnel, or we could help with like irrigation, micro irrigation for that. So your conservation planner will work with you by listening to what your goals and objectives are, as Cody had mentioned. And so with lots of feedback from multiple tribes throughout the state, and as well on a national level, NRCS collaborates through Tribal Advisory Council meetings, and we usually in California meet in the spring and in the fall. And so what that entails is we have different like tribal staff can come, individual tribal producers and ranchers can come and provide feedback. As a result of this, we developed a brand new conservation practice, and this is called the Indigenous Stewardship Methods Evaluation. So this just launched in 2023, and it's really neat, and it provides a lot of flexibility for tribes to be able to develop like a management plan or an enhancement plan that is very specific to what the current projects are. So for example, I work in Northern California, mainly out of the Eureka Field Office, which is in Humboldt County. So raise your hand if you're in Humboldt? Okay. How about Del Norte folks? Okay. All right. Any Trinity County by chance? No? Okay. Well, we'll get there. So those are the 3 counties that I primarily provide tribal conservation planning assistance in. So for example, one of the Humboldt County tribes I'm working with, they actually are piloting this with NRCS, and they're developing a cultural burn plan through funding. So NRCS, so this is funding that will provide I guess I should also go to the next slide. So thank you. So this allows funding for a tribe, for example, to designate what's called a qualified individual to write this unique plan. And so so as it says, so a QI, we have a lot of acronyms because we're a government agency. So qualified individual, QI. So for example, with that particular tribe, they're having their fire captain through their fire department be able to be the qualified individual to write the cultural burn plan for the rancheria. Another example is working on a culturally significant plant restoration. And so that way the funding is going to pay for like an elder or an elder committee to be able to provide some financial incentive for their time. But what's also neat is that once the plan itself has been developed, and usually we're aiming for about a year turnaround time, the final management plan, or the CEMA, which stands for the Conservation Enhancement Management, thank you. Conservation Evaluation Monitoring Activity. It's a new acronym, so I'm just trying to get that ingrained.
You're just lucky she didn't try to say the whole thing all the way through.
Yes. So once the plan is completed, it doesn't even have to be shared with NRCS, because we do value, each tribe would like to protect, knowledge. So we just, in order to certify that it's considered to be completed to get reimbursed, we just would need the qualified individual to provide some sort of written documentation stating that, yes, this management plan has been completed, and some sort of other written certification. So we are still very much so in a piloting phase, because it's brand new. So please, when you work with your tribal conservation planners, let them know what you like about the process, what you didn't like about the process, because we're actually trying to determine a payment rate. So right now it's going by acres. So I think we have it from like 0 to 10 acres is one payment rate, 11 acres to 100 acres is another payment rate, and then so on and so forth. So we are even seeking feedback as to if the price was too low or too high to meet the qualified individuals, if the compensation was correctly adequate. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of our workflow that was used to develop this process, and we don't need to get too far into the weeds of it, but I believe the PowerPoint presentation should be available through the Excel event app if you are interested in receiving a copy of our presentation. Next slide, please. And then just to follow up with some other ideas, not limiting to these bullet point items, but some of the things that other tribes have utilized this Indigenous stewardship methods evaluation is there's structure for water control, which is a fancy conservation practice that NRCS uses, but in this case, a harvest kettle. For the tribes that manage wild rice, we have our wetlands management conservation practice, and so wild rice planting could fall under that. We have what's called a conservation crop rotation, which is a practice, but if you wanted to utilize like the Three Sisters planting rotation, we would match it to that. As I mentioned earlier, prescribed burning. So this could be funding to write a cultural management burn plan. And then we have also a trails and walkways conservation practice. So maybe that can be considered enhancing existing traditional gathering trails, especially when it comes to elder access. We want to be able to make sure that it's compatible with, are these too steep? Well, if they are, let's make sure that they're somewhat safe and make it easy to climb up and down the mountain, right? And with that being said, we're definitely taking questions at the end. So please jot down some notes you may have for us, and we'll be happy to answer the questions. And so I'm going to turn it over to Pedro to follow up with a new thing that came about in 2023.
So alternative funding arrangements for tribes, and this is actually something that we've had available as a tool dating back to the previous Farm Bill, and then but it kind of was just a heading in the Farm Bill, but it didn't have any kind of guidance on how it could be applied, how it could be utilized. Alternative funding arrangements, although a very different authority than 638 funding that you can get through Department of Interior, it's sort of similar in nature in that when a tribe has the technical specialist expertise or the internal contracting mechanisms, and especially when they have situations that make participating in EQIP complicated, say for instance, multiple landowners utilizing the same area of land or multiple landowners with similar resource concerns. NRCS can essentially get into an agreement with the tribe where we allocate the funds for the project through this alternative funding arrangements, and then to different degrees, the tribe carries out a lot of the responsibilities that NRCS would carry about in normal EQIP. Next slide, please. So again, the most important points are, that the project in question still achieves the goals of EQIP or CSP. Those are the two programs we can enter into alternative funding arrangements. The project that does indeed address the resource concern. And then for some reason, you can justify that going through an alternative funding arrangement more easily achieves the purposes than going through typical EQIP practices. Say, for instance, you had on your reservation, you had 10 different producers, all with similar resource concerns and similar goals, and the tribe wanted to manage their contracts and provide the technical assistance for those contracts. That would be a good justification for alternative funding arrangements. Another one actually is if it is cost prohibitive to do EQIP practices because the payment rates that are available for EQIP practices, perhaps due to the remoteness of the reservation, the payment rates don't go anywhere near close to compensating the tribe for the actual costs of the alternative of installing practices. And another possible situation is where the goals of the project are really steeped in traditional tribal knowledge, and the NRCS we just don't have the capacity and knowledge even within an ISM SEMA to be able to assist in planning to that level. These are opportunities for assisting in AFAs. Next slide, please. And I apologize to you in the back. Y'all might have to turn around and read it. I can barely read it from here. These slides were made for virtual world, and so I apologize for knocking you with my fonts here. But the additional responsibilities that come with, I should say, flexibilities and responsibilities that come with AFAs. AFAs allow us, again, to be able to be flexible with payment rates, whereas Classic EQIP, we can't. We can reimburse the tribe for indirect costs during an alternative funding arrangements, and with Classic EQIP, we can't pay for indirect costs. We can reimburse the tribe for providing the technical assistance to the tribal members or within the AFAs, and under regular EQIP, we can't reimburse for those things. The technical assistance is typically provided by NRCS. Now, there's definitely more responsibilities under an AFA, documenting what the tribe is going to take on and what NRCS is going to take on in the form of the programmatic agreement, documenting the number of participants. There's one thing that is in the statute is that the number of participants in the AFA have to be enough to meet the objectives of the AFA. And again, that language was meant to make sure that when a tribe is entering into an AFA, they're not leaving tribal members out that would really be necessary in facilitating the objectives of that alternative funding arrangements. Compliance with federal, state, and local laws, especially things like our cultural resources documentation and Endangered Species Act. There's certain parts of compliance that we need to, as NRCS, as a government agency, because this still falls under the finding of no significant impact that EQIP and CSP have at a national level. We still need to document, and then funds management between NRCS and the tribe. Who is going to take that on? Who's going to make sure? And then documenting that tribal members that participate in the AFA meet our eligibility in adjusted gross income requirements, as well as don't exceed the payment caps that exist for participants in NRCS. And then probably the largest thing is that under EQIP, regular EQIP, you participate in our programs, the planner comes out, works with the tribe or with the individual, develops the conservation plan, sets up the contract, which is then a set of practices, and explains to the participant how to do those practices. The participant, the tribe or tribal member, goes back, completes the practices, then NRCS goes, certifies the practice, and the individual gets paid for that. Now, under an alternative funding arrangement, because so much more of the responsibilities fall on the tribe through the agreement, there are financial and performance reportings that do need to be submitted to make sure that the components of the AFAs are being met. It's probably the largest responsibility that's added on to an AFA above Classic, EQIP, or CSP. Next slide, please. Again, the sort of co-title of this was related to traditional ecological knowledge and food sovereignty. Another thing that came out of the last Farm Bill was the Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production. I know most of you saw the title Office of Urban Agriculture and said, well, that's not me. And most tribes, that's the thing. They see that and immediately think, no, that's not me. A lot of really cool nuances on how NRCS and USDA in general has does business has come out of this movement towards supporting urban agriculture. But the main thing is related to supporting localized food systems. And the Office of Urban Agriculture really is more focused on addressing problems with food insecurity and community food systems than it is about being centered in urban environments. And so some of the things that came out of the Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production, I'll start with the two lower ones. They did open urban offices. In California, we've got one opening in Compton and one opening in Oakland, and then did form the Federal Advisory Committee on Urban and Innovative Needs to provide input to the chief of NRCS on how NRCS could better address urban and community needs. But probably the most important is the grants program. And if you could go to the next slide, please. And again, I apologize for the fonts here. Wow, I should have fixed that one for sure. It was much bigger on my computer at home, I swear. So again, these grants do not require that the applicant be in an urban center to apply for the grants. Okay, there's three types of grants. One is a compost and food waste grant. And then the other two are related to solving issues of food insecurity. One of them is project planning grant, and one of them is a project implementation grant. And yes, the model for some of these grants are urban community gardens or bringing food from agricultural areas into urban centers, but they don't require they be in an urban center. So it could be a tribal community garden. And these grants do have a strong push to be available to tribal communities. And so they could be, again, tribal community garden. It could be a tribal led food distribution system. Could be tribal composting needs. Again, all you have to show in applying for these grants is that your community faces food insecurity and that your project seeks to address those issues of food insecurity. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the disaster relief programs that are available. These are kind of USDA-wide. Risk Management Agency provides crop insurance. That's a lot less important to folks that don't have large agricultural operations. Farm Service Agency, kind of our sister organization, has several different disaster relief programs related to tree mortality, emergency forest restoration, livestock forest disaster. I know they had some really large pushes over the last few years for livestock forage in large drought areas where the level of drought had reached so high that was considered a disaster. And then for NRCS, there's the Emergency Watershed Program. Typically, the Emergency Watershed Program comes in after a disaster has been declared, and it's to provide protection to life and property immediately following a disaster. Now, under the old rules, previous Farm Bill, it had to be a disaster that was declared by the federal government. But in the new Farm Bill, it was determined that tribal governments could declare a disaster. And so if there's a fire on the reservation and it burns the watershed such that subsequent rains could negatively impact tribal housing, the tribal chairperson, the tribal council could declare it a disaster and ask Natural Resources Conservation Service to come in with Emergency Watershed Protection Program funds to help protect those houses from the erosion that could impact them while the hillside is revegetating. It's kind of in fact, I hate that I have to use this as an example, but it was a great example until it wasn't a great example. We had a tribe, I hope they're not in here. I'm not going to say who it was. We had a tribe, had a fire on the reservation, and the watershed above a cultural site was impacted. And the concern was that subsequent rains could negatively impact the cultural site. There were holdups, in part because it was a cultural site. So it got held up in Section 106 consultation process, and some of it was on fee land, and there was all sorts of things that kind of stopped us from being able to really make this program work. But the tribe was able to declare that it was a disaster and that the value of the property warranted the protection of the hillside. And then it got kind of jumbled up in our internal processes. Fortunately, they got really light rains right after that, and the hillside established vegetation very quickly. And so it fixed itself before NRCS could get in and fix it. I guess that's the nicest way of saying that. But I think that the moral is that the tribe can declare it's a disaster and determine that the value of even a cultural site, something that we can't put a numeric value on, warrants the federal government putting money towards protecting of that area. Next slide, please. And if you come and see us at the table, we have this wonderful little sort of short document for disaster assistance programs at a glance. We're over there, just past that door yonder. So I mentioned before that Erin and Cody are our tribal planners. I'm one of 2 tribal liaisons in the state of California. If you're joining us from Nevada, the tribal liaison's name is Jonathan George, and for Arizona, the tribal liaison's name is Laverne Jean. The kind of way we differ, tribal liaisons, we work at the state level. We work with our state tribal advisory committee and with our state conservationist. We help the field staff provide assistance to tribes, but we don't provide that direct assistance. And we provide feedback from the tribes to our state conservationist in ways to make our programs better. We really are more responsible for sort of policy and program development, whereas our tribal planners are more responsible for program implementation. I do not believe that Arizona and Nevada have the title tribal planner for any of their staff, but certainly their field staff that are in the counties where those tribes are represented provide that same assistance. I had the privilege of working on a long-term NRCS tribal staffing plan. And one of the recommendations in that tribal staffing plan was to, one, make sure that the number of states that had tribal liaisons was proportional to the assistance that was that we could provide to tribes. We looked at a rundown of tribal lands across the entire country, and we looked at the amount of full-time equivalents that we had available in the field offices to support those tribes, and really showed at where those gaps were. And we're, in fact, in the next couple of months, finalizing that plan and providing sort of that input to all the states, letting them know where they really need to have those full-time equivalents dedicated to working with tribes at the state tribal liaison level, as well as the tribal planner level. And in California, we've really set the pace for that. We currently have 3 in the state of California, and we're waiting on, what's the name of it? 7 more. Yeah. But it's, what do they call that? The name of the explanation of a job? Position description. Thank you. We're waiting for finalized position descriptions to come back from HR, and hoping by the end of the calendar year to be able to fly 7 more tribal planner positions. And we were, again, this is the forward thinking of our state conservationists. We, the tribal planners and tribal liaisons, were integral in determining, where those positions were needed, what those position descriptions would look like. We even asked for flexibility in the job series for the individual so that we could get individuals that had more of a history of working with tribal environmental departments rather than an individual who had more of a history of working with agricultural producers. And we did. We really, our typical planner position has to be a soil conservationist. They have to have mostly soil-based units in their education. We had them fly it as a general biology series so that we could target folks that, again, had more of that tribal experience and not necessarily an agricultural producer's experience. Next slide, please. How much time do I have? Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to kind of what's up? So I just kind of wanted to follow up because I felt that was kind of a little quick regarding our planning process, right? When we come out and let's say you were in the EQIP program, right? It's usually about 9 months from the time we sign contracts to where Pedro said we have to clear cultural resources, right? And just so that you guys know, if you have a tribal TIPO, our cultural resource specialist will work directly with that TIPO to that clearance. But it's usually about, I tell people 9 months before you even start. So why I brought that up is we don't just send you out there blindly, right? I feel like there's some unknowns because we don't do the work, right? And we pay after it's completed. So I just like that we have the ability to do advance payment. We can give you 50% upfront, but you have to spend it in 90 days. So a lot of times, like you're like, hey, I'm going to do forest stand improvement. I always just go to forestry because it's like a suite of practices, right? We would reduce the amount of trees per acre based on whether we were trying to just reduce the stand density or reduce fuels. We have what's called tree shrub pruning, right? And so everything that's existing, then we would reduce those ladder fuels and pay you called woody residue treatment to treat your processed down wood, right? Each one of those practices has implementation requirements. So that's how it works is we put it together. Then when we meet with you before you start, we give you the requirements on how it needs to be completed, because that's how we come out and certify you, right? There needs to be a standard that we can come out and meet to make sure you met that objective. So I just wanted to throw it out there because it's like it is an unknown, right? So you can't start your project until you actually have those implementation requirements, right? So it's being patient, right? And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes there's an immediate need. It got to get done right away. So that's just where if once we're in contract stage, you kind of just got to hold tight until you get those IRs, and then we come out and certify after it's done. So I just wanted to put that out there. And I know there's people from all over the area, but we do so much. There's so many practices. It's so broad what we do. I mean, everything from traditional plant management, forestry work, livestock pipelines, right? A lot of livestock stuff, but even tractor replacement, right? We have a combustion system improvement practice. It's like, because I've now that I'm working with individual tribal members more than just tribes as a whole, equipment, right? That's one of the practices we have, and I throw it out there because I'm seeing it kind of pop up a lot. So it's very, very diverse on what we do. It's not just the simple forestry stuff. There's so many practices. So I just want to make sure I explain those IRs. Yeah, those are implementation requirements. Sorry, I started talking my own language. And then high tunnels is I started just thinking of practices that I've worked on locally the last 2 years. We've done a lot of high tunnels, right? So that can go for your traditional plants, right? Or just your general, if you're growing just some general vegetable crops or whatever, that just gives you ability to extend your growing season, throw shade cloth on there during summer months. A lot of forestry work, some fencing, some pipeline stuff, some riparian planting. So I mean, it's so diverse on what we do. Once we really have to get out there and see what your objectives are and what your resource concerns are, and then we kind of pull those specialists in and really put that plan together. So yeah, you want to host this? Yeah,
we do. Did you want to go to questions now, or can I throw one more thing in before?
Okay.
Before we go to questions, I want to tell a little anecdote. First time my father went to pick my mother up for a date. He shows up at my grandmother's house, knocks on the door. My mom's upstairs getting ready. My grandmother answers the door and asks my father, would you like a cup of coffee? Now, my grandmother's Colombian. My father's Puerto Rican. And so my father responds, un taza de café será bien. Now, to my Colombian grandmother, a taza is a small bowl. In Puerto Rico, a taza is a coffee cup. So my grandmother goes into the kitchen and pours my father a small bowl of coffee, all the time thinking these crazy Puerto Ricans drink their coffee out of small bowls. My father receives it and proceeds to drink out of it, thinking these crazy Colombians drink their coffee out of small bowls. So my mom comes down and sees my father meekly sipping on his bowl of coffee and says, what's going on here? And my father goes, that's what she gave me. And my grandmother goes, that's what he asked for. So when you hear agriculture, remember, we're talking about your traditional gathering areas. We're talking about traditional hunting grounds. We're talking about your traditional food gatherings. And when we say urban, we're really talking about community. And so I just don't want you to walk away thinking I tried to offer you a small bowl of coffee. Any questions?
Can't NRCS funds be used in conjunction with other programs?
Yes. Couple things, right? Typically, we can't be paying for the same thing. If it's another federal program, we can't be paying for the same thing as that program. But that said, we're paying a flat rate for a specific practice being installed. Okay. That practice is meant to be, that flat rate is meant to be 90% of that practice. Now, if we give you $10 for a fence, that it costs you $15 to install, that other $5 could come from anywhere. It could be government funds, could be 638 funds, could be the tribe's own money, right? At that point, we're still not paying for the same thing. If that's what's happening, I recommend documenting that, although we never ask for receipts. But am I clear? Okay.
Except when we do advance payment, we do need to verify this. I mean,
Right. That's the only time we do ask for receipts is when we request advance payments. And the reason is because we do advance payments and then we have to show within 90 days that you've spent the money. So again, that same fence, say we're paying you, what did I say? 15? Say we're paying you $10 for fence. Within 90 days, you have to show us, we gave you $5 for it. Within 90 days, you got to show us you spent those $5.
And it's not to complete the practice, right? You just have to, it's for your materials.
Right.
You got to pay a contractor to come out. It just has to show that it's liquidated in 90 days. It's not to complete your practice.
Right. You have to spend the money in 90 days. You have to you complete the practice on time as it's scheduled in the contract. There was another question.
Hi. Do any of these services assist with like weed abatement or like invasive species removal or anything like that?
Sure. Again, if say you've got a tribal traditional gathering area, say a willow stand or a sedge stand, and it's got invasive plants, could be herbaceous weed control. It could be, if it's tamarisk, it could be brush control. Those are bread and butter practices that we have in our programs. And again, the resource concern there is plant species and composition. The agricultural lands are traditional gathering areas, and then the practices are pretty straightforward. Yes. Is there another question? Oh, yes, sir.
Sorry.
That's all right. I saw the mic go that way. I didn't see where it went.
You said tamarisk and that, I wrote that down. What about air quality? So, and I'll elaborate a little bit more. I
Sure.
mean, that's a big part of our air pollution is soil erosion, and from not just from farming areas, but a lot of just the native parts of the reservation where there's, it's just old desert, and with climate change, we're losing those native species and just not having anything come back. There's also complicated by wild horses, and we have a perfect environment for that dust entrainment during lighter and lighter wind speeds. So do you guys have resources available to assist with that kind of soil conservation?
So air quality, we do have air quality as a resource concern. The difficulty gets into recognizing where you're dealing with the dust issue as agricultural land, right? And then the practices to mitigate those effects. And so if it's a tribal traditional gathering area and it's bare soil, we could do something like a conservation cover that puts vegetation on the ground. But if you're talking about kind of reservation roads that are just dirt roads, and it's tribal traffic that's running up and down the roads that's causing the quality concerns, it gets a little harder.
No, I'm talking about just land that's not developed, but it's just kind of open land. So it's not farming, it's not developed, it's just the desert.
Yeah, like I said, again, if you're not managing it as a traditional gathering area, it's hard for us to treat it as an agricultural land, and that's the best answer I've got for you. Yeah. It is hard to get into the minutia of things in this kind of a presentation, but we have an air quality program that replaces tractors, updates tractors in areas that, in Southern California where we have non-attainment. If you've got an older tractor and you replace it with a tractor that has better emissions, we can do that, but that fits all the boxes.
We have a windbreak. I mean, I just
Right.
started thinking off my top of my head.
Yeah.
Windbreak practice.
Right.
Yeah, there is some
True.
things there, but like Pedro said,
Oh,
I'm sorry. It's just important, like Pedro said, is that we're able to qualify that land as agriculture land, right? So when we show up, you just say, I mean, you're growing plants out there, traditional plants, right? Like like help us help you. That's kind of, guess, the easiest way to put it, right? And that's our job, is to make that fit the best we can. But sometimes if it doesn't fit, then it just doesn't. But yeah.
Nina. Oh,
Oh, we have 2 minutes, just.
2 whole minutes.
Sorry, here you go.
Nina's going to take 5, and we'll give it to her.
I could take 5.
Nina is the one who helped us come up with the ISME SEMA, by the way, back in 10 years ago at a time.
Not quite that long
Was it
ago.
not that quite
No,
long? Okay.
7.
So-
So I was going to say that what you just said, like if you're not sure if you're ag, if you gather on your land, you're ag. That's just bottom line. You gather anything on your land, traditional plants, medicines, whatever, you're ag. You don't have to have mainstream agriculture for it to
Right.
fit in ag. And the thing I was wondering, so earlier today, we saw, some of us, I think in this room, saw a presentation on composting and biochar.
Yeah, I was bummed I missed that.
Yes, that's too bad. You should go talk to Dakota
I
at
should.
Pinoleville. But it makes me think that as you talk about building a program and putting together like your gardens, putting nutrition back into the soil, rebuilding your soil that's been lost. And I know not everywhere is good for biochar, but mixing that biochar and vermicomposting, that's something that you could write into this, right? Or is there like certain language you could help us put it together to
Right.
write into it? Because it is repairing and restoring that land and rebuilding your soil. And you are NRCS,
Right.
Natural Conservation
Right.
Soil Service. So
So
and you did form because of the Dust Bowl,
Correct.
given the fact that soil was so degraded. So if this
Right.
is rebuilding the soil, you see what I'm going here?
I am,
Are these
totally.
terms that we could use
yeah,
to
absolutely.
build this grant proposal that we want to be funded for this?
Yeah. So, program participation contract. It's not a formal grant proposal. So the thing is, like, compost, as applied as compost, is considered a soil amendment and kind of an agricultural management practice. Mulch, on the other hand, and compost can be applied as a mulch as long as it is not incorporated into the soil. That is a soil conserving practice that adds organic matter to the soil. So it comes down to the vernacular, right? And what you're saying and how you apply it. I think there's a CSP enhancement for biochar, but I have no idea how it works. Been away from programs for too long. But.
So just saying, as we talk about non-traditional agriculture in the mainstream form, but
Yeah.
tribal traditional agriculture, a lot of that uses burning.
Yes.
So that goes back into amending, providing nutrition into
Yes.
that soil to grow that harvest.
Yeah. And one of the ISME SEMAs that we've already contracted is for a cultural burn plan. And we actually wrote an amendment to the national prescribed burn policy to include some concerns in California, but among those to include the concept of cultural burning as being distinct from other types of broadcast burning. Other types of
So
prescribed fire.
I would like to propose that in either one of these TAC meetings that we have or on a separate thing, that we sit down and we dial in how you can tie this all together into a project.
Let's do it.
All right. You heard them. They said, let's do
All
it.
right. The next one's in like 3 weeks, so we probably don't have time to get it together for that. But the thing is, we at one point tried to do a cultural burning subcommittee of the TAC, and it wound up being another meeting for everybody that was involved. And we had a fairly extensive cultural burn. It was a speaker series presentation where we had tribal traditional burn professionals from all over the state participate and provide that input into the prescribed burn policy. And the next thing really is developing a technical note for cultural burning so that our planners understand what that means. And that's been in the works, but it moves at government speed. It's a little quicker than glacial speed. Oh, yes, Anna.
I have a quick question. Is there a place where all the practices and say the cost per acre can be found? We can see them all at once.
Yeah, it's called the practice list. Is that what it's called? Yeah, and it's public. Is it on our website? Right. Right. So the FY24 rates haven't been released yet, but they are annually available and they are public. And the best place to get it would be just ask your local NRCS office. And then there's typically 2 rates, and tribes immediately qualify for the historically underserved rate, which is the higher rate. Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh,
In the chat.
there's-
Hope we get a planner in Lake County.
So one of the tribal planners is designated for that area. I think the plan is to put him in Ukiah, but they might wind up at the field office in Lake County because Ukiah just got a bunch of staff. So help is coming. Thank you. When he was finished, I was like, damn, he didn't take long enough.
I know.
I hope I can talk. And then I looked down, when I was done, I'm like, oh shit, I don't have time for my story. Hello.
I'm Pam from Austin.
Oh, okay. Right on. Yes, you've been working with the Lima. Yeah.
Contracts down there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
so
didn't know that.
they've been working with the farm.
So that's what I was just
Yeah,
gonna
yeah,
say.
for
So
sure.
we're legit like.
Yeah,
ag
totally.
land.
Yeah. No, I've been out there. It's
So you guys
gorgeous
already
property.
have stuff
Yeah,
going on.
yeah. Lima, Segoviano, and Tomas.
Were they
Campos.
on your contact?
They were not, because they're not. So he's actually the tribal planner that covers that area.
Okay.
But Alima's been working with them for longer than he's worked for us.
That's it too. Like any of our other, unless they call me to come out, like Tomas is not in his office.
Okay.
So he went down there. They were already had it established before I even started. So I just put it out the way.
And I think most of it's centered around windbreaks and hedgerows.
Some soil stuff. I have an active contract that's been getting paid and certified.
Okay.
So